Welcome back to Ask the Educator, a podcast for all professionals involved in medical device processing and sponsored by Healthmark Industries. The education team here at Healthmark has 280 years of combined experience in areas ranging from sterile processing, endoscopy, OR, biomed, to hospital and industry leadership. Our goal is to leverage our collective experience to answer one of your questions each episode, giving you the practical tips you need to succeed in the evolving world of device processing. My name is Kevin Anderson, clinical educator here at Healthmark, and I will be your host. Let's get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our Ask the Educator podcast. Stephen Kovach and I are moving along here on our series about the 10 factors for cleaning. And today we were going to look at our industry standards as one of the 10 factors. So Steve, if you would just kind of introduce us to this idea and maybe talk to us a little bit about our industry standards.
Sure. Well, again, why these are critical factors in cleaning and almost anything we do. And Kevin, you as a manager, you'll be able to dovetail these things together. We have to remember that most of us are surveyed or audited by different groups. And what do they turn to? They turn to standards and guidelines and professional groups. And there is a little difference in these. And if you look at like AAMI is a group of consensus where you have industry experts, manufacturers, users, a hodgepodge of people, consultants, looking and sharing information. And what they try to use is clinically relevant and evidence-based information. You try to use peer-reviewed literature, other articles. A lot of the manufacturers have research information. The FDA also participates in it, which is really, really good. So they're sharing their research and their science. And the AAMI is a consensus. It's a dynamic process where some of the other, they're more professional guidelines in that. They're not as a consensus document. They're good, but they don't have all the same input in voting and so on. But if you look at them all, they do have some major points. They want quality management, monitoring, and so on. And so then groups like CMS and Joint Commission, they will turn to these standards and guidelines and use some of that for best practice. And I'd like to give a couple examples, and I'd like you to chime in on this. One example, Kevin, is if you look at ST 79, they talk about continuing education, and it recommends that it should be provided on a regular interval. Not must, but should. So this way, when auditors come in, they're going to say, what are you doing for your staff, and so on. So these guidelines and standards are intertwined and dovetailed with different things. And think about, I know we talked a little bit about the IFUs earlier, but think about it. If you had an IFU, many of them in that IFU will say reference to standard ST 90 or 91 or 79 or 58 for best practice. Right, Kevin? Do you remember reading a lot of those as a manager and going through it? You know,
there's definitely IFUs out there that reference our industry standards. And I also think of sometimes there's IFUs out there that just plain are too vague or there's not enough information in there. And so our industry standards might provide some guidance there where there's maybe a little bit too few instructions for us to give us adequate direction on things. And I also think about when I first started as a manager in SPD, especially coming over from the operating room, I relied on those industry standards to get myself familiarized with the industry and what I should really be looking for, and to give myself something, a clearer picture of what I needed to be doing in my department, what I needed to be looking for, what I needed to expect of my team, how to educate them, all those things. I got a lot of that from our standards. And again, you know, Joint Commission accreditation reviews, they're doing the same thing. They're all educating themselves on SPD now, and they're doing that by going to our industry standards.
Yeah, that's It is very interesting that we know that the survey people, they try to do risk reduction and process improvement. That's the heart and soul of their surveys, whether it's CMS or AAAHC or DNV-GL, which is the ISO standards. It's very important that people know how these interact within our department. And I want to give a really good example. I'm going to go back, ST79, everybody quotes it. That was last updated in 2017, 3 years ago. But there was a whole section in there that was given more detailed sonic cleaning. And very specifically, if you go back to the other one when it was written, A1, A2, and I think 2015 or whatever it was before 2017 came about, they actually added that now if you have lumen or pulse flow or retro flow with the sonic, you need to check for that independently along with cavitation and other things. So these are dynamic, but sometimes because the review process of these standards and guidelines take 2, 3, 4, 5 years, as a manager or as a technician, you still have to be up on peer-reviewed literature, what's going on. So when you make your standard operating procedures or policy and procedures, the guidelines might be lagging a little and you need to keep up with those things. And so that's why these give you a good foundation, but you still have to be up on what's going on. And I'll quote something else from 79, or do the best I can. It says, the responsibility of the sterile processing should be assigned to qualified individuals. Well, who is qualified? How are you qualified? What do you know about? So again, you go back and you start looking at these standards and guidelines to give you some direction so you can have a good running department to get to best practice and maintain best practice. And I agree, it's a great way to start and complement, Kevin. Your thoughts on that area of it,
Yeah, I think about my role as a nurse and in the operating room and things like that, and the surgeons and physicians, even outside of the operating room, there's a standard of care that is developed over time based on those peer-reviewed literatures and data that's collected over time. And it's the same thing for our industry, and things so rapidly change. It's so important to stay up not only on whatever the current standard is, but also, like you said, on the new information that comes out, because as we all know, the medical devices continue to get more complex and the procedures are getting more complex. And if we don't have those standards to rely on, and we're just being, haphazard sort of in the way we run our department with no direction, you're really opening yourself up for some liability problems and some quality control problems and things like that. And unfortunately, in my opinion, that for the vast majority of time that I worked in the operating room, I feel like that's sort of how our SPD was run. It was just sort of run like with not a very strong foundation. And so I think that is unfortunately a very common problem. And I think one of the best ways to get started in getting in the right direction is to go back to those standards, educate yourself, educate your team, and really lay a solid foundation one piece at a time. You can't, go through there and just put everything into place right away, but you can go in, one section at a time and chip away and get other people from your hospital, infection prevention, educated. You can get your quality people educated and they can help you,
Yeah. What I want to do is, we try to keep these under 15 minutes to get people to think. So I'd like people to think about this. The big term is crosswalk and dovetailing standards within each other. And a lot of people use joint commission. So joint commission requires that facilities evaluate employees' competencies to perform their job. So within ST79, it recommends that continuing education should be provided at regular intervals. So thus the department should be doing some of these things, having staff meetings, attending webinars, even listening to our podcasts or other ones. And 79 also goes on and says that all personnel performing processing should be certified as a condition of employment. And I know this is a touchy subject for another time, but here within our documents that you use, regardless of whether your state or city requires it, the surveying people are saying you should be competent. And part of that minimum requirement is to be certified within the document that people use. So they need to understand how to work with their HR and their management to try to get everybody certified, so you're at least talking on the same level. So when you talk to somebody, they know what a pulse vac is, or steam, or low temperature, and it makes it better for a professional setting. So again, standards and guidelines play an important factor in everything we do, but they also dictate when it comes to cleaning and understanding if there's something wrong, you should put in a quality management system, PQ process, and verify your process, whether it's sterilizing with biologicals or chemical indicators, or using cleaning verification tests like the TOCIs or a sauna check for cavitation, or many of the other things out there. So I hope, Kevin, you and I have given people an idea how important it is. They need to know it and what's in there. And like you said, how it helped you start to get your department going in a direction. So I hope we've given them some things to think about in this area.
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned how it, without even saying it explicitly, but how it definitely integrates with your human factors that we just talked about, and how those two play off of each other. If you don't have the standards, the competencies, and all that the standards require, now you're going to run into human factor issues and things like that. And that's how they all play together.
Yeah.
And my hope is that our listeners will understand that the standards are so important. And if you have issues in your cleaning process, you have to check your processes against your standards. Are you up to where you need to be? This is just, again, one of those other factors that you guys can look into and make sure, do you have those resources, and are you letting those guide your practice?
Yeah. I know I'm going to be a chatty Cathy and you want to wind it up here, but you made me think. So imagine again, because I like using the Sonic because it's very simple. If your Sonic isn't working and you don't know, you need to verify it according to the standards. Find out products that will help you understand what's going on. And I know we've got more in other chapters, but again, use these as a foundation and building block along with everything else to understand and get your department where it should be, Kevin. So again, thanks for letting me talk about this other critical cleaning factor, and look forward to when we got to pick up on the next one. Okay.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you, Stephen. And thank you to our listeners for joining us. I hope you're enjoying the series on our 10 factors. Please check out the other episodes. Tell us what you think. Give us some feedback. What have you ran into in your own departments and in your own experience where one of these factors have come into play? Share your experience. We'd love to hear from you. And you can send any information or thoughts that you might have at asktheeducator@hmark.com. Thanks again for listening, you guys. Okay, I want to recap this episode. This was part 4 of a 10-part series on the 10 factors of cleaning. And in this episode, Stephen and I talked about how industry standards can play a role in our cleaning process. Our standards from AAMI give us evidence-based practices, consensus documents that help guide our complex processes and give us direction with our quality control programs. If you do not have a copy of the AAMI guidelines or standards, I encourage you to get them. And one easy way is to sign up for our rewards program at HealthMark. Purchasing supplies for your department can earn you dollars, or SPDs as we call them, that can be used to buy materials like the AAMI standards or other educational materials. I want to also encourage our international audience to learn about your industry standards and have those in your department as well. I want to thank you all again for listening. You can check out our other episodes on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and more. All opinions expressed on this show are those of the presenters. Before using any medical device, it is important to review the device manufacturer's instructions for use.